I don't usually like to ride in the rain, but sometimes you'll be going somewhere and the weather will be poor and you won't really have a choice but to brave it. Or you'll be out and the weather will turn bad and you'll just get caught out in it. So it's always good to know what extra things you might have to consider if you're riding in bad weather. So here are some tips for riding in the rain. First off, this is especially easy if you know that the weather's going to be bad, but it's to consider what you're wearing. Usually leathers tend to be perforated for the summer, so you get better airflow, but riding in gear that has big holes in it is obviously not great if the weather is wet. So try and wear something waterproof like textiles, or wear a waterproof shell or layer on top of your leathers or something like that. But your ride will be a lot less comfortable if your actual clothes get wet. You'll also be a lot colder, it'll be harder to concentrate, so it's a bit less safe. So try and wear something waterproof. I'm also wearing waterproof gloves on this ride, just because my hands get freezing. These are really good at keeping the water off and keeping your hands warm as well. One thing I don't like about winter gloves is they tend to be quite clunky and it's hard to feel the controls. So as a beginner, it can be quite hard if your grip and your throttle control and things like that aren't that good anyway, to do it in gloves when you can't really feel what you're doing. If you wear summer gloves, your hands are likely to go numb, which obviously isn't helpful either, but one really good tip is to wear a thin pair of summer gloves and get heated grips. This way, your hands might still get wet, especially if the gloves have vents or holes in them, but if you find ones that are waterproof but still quite thin, you can keep your hands warm and still feel the controls. Once you get a little bit better and you build up that muscle memory, you won't necessarily have to do this, and you will be able to get away with wearing proper winter gloves. But it's always a good idea to get gloves that fit you properly, because winter gloves are already a lot harder to feel with. So if you're wearing ones that are way too big for you or something, it's going to be even harder for you to operate the controls. But if you're not comfortable wearing gloves when you can't really feel that well, wear your normal summer gloves and try and get some heated grips. It's a really good way to stay warm. So that's the main thing. As long as your clothes are warm and waterproof, you should be fine. Your visor will get rain on it and it will be quite hard to see out of. Usually winter gloves will have some kind of plastic squeegee on the fingers so you can wipe the rain off your visor. I find that it doesn't work that well, but it works okay. Otherwise you can just wipe the visor with your palm, but try not to get the inside of the visor wet. So if you take your helmet off, make sure you keep the visor closed, because wiping raindrops off of the inside of the visor is obviously a lot harder to do when you're riding. Also, if you wear glasses like I do, try to keep raindrops off of them as well, because even if you have a clear visor but your glasses have water droplets on them, you're obviously not going to be able to see that well. Another thing to think about is visibility, and this kind of goes with clothing. So I don't have any high-vis gear, but I would like to get some high-vis waterproof, just because in the rain it's a lot harder to see. It's also a lot harder to be seen. So if you're wearing dark colour clothes and you're riding a dark colour bike, it's already not that easy to see you, and you're making it 100 times harder for yourself. So wearing a high-vis vest, at least, it doesn't look that nice, but it's a lot easier for people to see you, and that's the main thing. You imagine how hard it is for you to see, and you're a small motorcyclist, so how hard is it going to be for cars to see you? So if you can wear something bright or high-vis, that's going to be really, really helpful. In terms of riding, you have to make sure that all of your riding is twice as smooth as it usually is. This is things like throttle control, clutch control, moving off, braking, turning, all of those things. As a beginner, you might not be that good at yet, and it might be kind of jerky, which is fine in the dry, but in the rain, every little mistake you make is going to be 10 times harder to recover from. So try and keep the bike as upright as possible, don't make any jerky movements on the throttle or the clutch, don't brake too hard, things like that. Just try and keep everything as smooth as possible to reduce the chance of you slipping or losing traction. Especially if you're riding a 125 with really thin tyres, if the tyres aren't that good or they're quite old, then your traction is probably going to be quite poor. It's just something to consider. Try and avoid riding through big puddles as well, because it's easy to lose traction that way. But mainly when it's dry, just practice doing everything as smoothly as possible, so that when it's wet, it won't be too much of an issue for you. Another thing is obviously stopping distance. Your stopping distance in the rain is about twice as what it is in the dry, so try and keep a nice distance from cars if you don't already, but especially in the wet, try and keep that at least twice as long, and just be prepared to stop a lot quicker. This also means riding a little bit slower than you would usually, as long as it's safe to do so. Don't open the throttle up wide, because it's already going to be a lot harder for you to take off and a lot harder for you to stop. So just try and do everything smoothly, slowly and controlled. But I used to be super nervous about riding in the rain, Really, the best way to practice is just to do it. It's not that bad, it's not 100% different. The main things you're going to have to be aware of is just to keep a nicer distance away from cars, maybe ride a little bit slower, and the best way to practice when it's raining but not too bad, or maybe when the roads are wet but the rain has stopped, so if it rained a little while ago. I wouldn't go out and practice, in a thunderstorm if it's your first time riding in the rain, but definitely get some practice riding in bad conditions, because that's just life. The weather might say it's not going to rain today, but on your way home it starts raining or something. You don't want to get super nervous and get in your own head and start making mistakes. As soon as you go out on your first ride in the rain, you'll know exactly what you're lacking in terms of gear. Obviously, if you get soaked all the way through, you're going to know to get some waterproof gear. I find that buying a waterproof layer that you can wear over the top of your existing gear is a really good option, probably better than buying specific waterproof gear unless it rains all the time where you are. It just works out a little bit cheaper, and it means that you can wear, say you've got a set of leathers that you wear for summer, you can wear those in the winter as well. Just layer something underneath it so you don't get cold, stick some waterproofs on top so you don't get wet, and then you can just keep one set, you won't need to get multiple. But different types of clothes will have different benefits, different pros and cons. So I like to have a set of textiles for poorer weather and a set of leathers for the summer, but I'll make a separate video about that. The way to keep the cost down really is just to get a layer that you can put on top, but have a look, try some stuff on, see what works best for you. When it's raining, it's usually quite cold as well, and your face is usually quite warm. This means that your visor will steam up almost all the time, probably while you're riding even, not just when you're stopped at traffic lights. The best way to overcome this by far is to buy a pinlock visor for your helmet if it accommodates one. These are really, really good if you fit them properly, and they're not that hard to fit. They stop your visor from fogging up completely. Like I said in another video, they're one of the best things I've bought. So if you do a lot of winter riding, I would definitely recommend you investing in a pinlock visor. It will just mean that you won't have to keep flipping your visor up when it fogs up and then getting your face covered in rain. Hopefully those tips were useful for you. Let me know if you have any hacks that you use yourself. Like I said, the best way to practice is just to get out there and do it. Don't be too nervous about it, there's not too much to think about. Just make sure that everything is smooth and controlled, keep a nicer distance away from cars, and keep your speed down, at least for the first while. Safe riding, and I'll see you guys in the next one.